Om Shanti, warm welcome to Raj Yoga Essentials. Our topic this evening is detached observer, a really important skill to develop for anything in life, but very, very helpful in a spiritual practice. As usual, we'll start with a moment of reflection. I bring into my mind's eye the image of a tree. I can see all the branches, all the leaves. And as I move along towards the trunk, seeing all the branches unite in a single support, and down the trunk to the roots, and finally the seed. And now I take that image of the tree and turn it upside down. So in my mind's eye, the seed is at the top, surrounded by the roots, then the trunk, and the branches dangling down below with all the leaves. Imagining this tree is the very aspects of my life. And at any given time, I could be caught up in a single issue or aspect of my life, like a leaf on a branch. There's so much expansion and so much detail in the branches and leaves of the tree. But if I move towards the seed, that still point of the seed amidst the roots, I can observe the entire tree, all the activity of my life from a very calm and central place. And if those roots represent my core values, and the seed the very essence of who I am, I can observe my life through the lens of what I value most and from a place of authenticity and honesty, from my highest potential. How would I then view all the different aspects of my life? And how would that affect decisions I make in the different aspects of my life? Om Shanti. Om Shanti. And welcome to Raj Yoga Essentials. So tonight's topic is detached observer. And we may have to start with, what does detached observer even mean? Some hear that word detached and I have to say they share, turns them off actually, or they don't like the feeling of it. So perhaps maybe it helps to know what that means in the context of Raja Yoga. I've always liked the word witness, at least the concept of it, perhaps different from what happens practically, but the idea and theory of a witness is one who simply observes
with the intention of getting to the truth. And I think that's really very connected to the concept of detached observer. So, the idea of detached that we're using here is really free of all those biases. So, a very clean and clear way of looking at things. Sometimes we use the word objective, but also the intention behind this intention of caring, of benefiting, of wanting to understand. So, being able to be a witness or an observer of myself and ideally everything going on around me from a very particular position, which is one of caring and understanding and benefiting. And sometimes I often think of the EMS staff who, they arrive at a critical situation. And I think that at that moment, they're great detached observers or responders because, getting caught up in the emotional, it really renders them not very useful. But they're coming in with their skills, they're coming in with their best of themselves, and they really are looking at the situation with the intention to benefit. So it's a very powerful skill to develop as we're trying to transform the self towards our highest potential.
So, why use that word detach? Some find it feels like I'm not feeling anything.
Mm.
Why do I need to be a detached observer?
If we use the opposite word, attached, I think it becomes clear.
Well, neither of them sound good.
So, the idea of strings attached. So, we tend to actually look at things with a lot of baggage and a lot of desires. And this is a very distorted way to look at things. It really isn't going to bring benefit. In fact, all it will do is make us repeat or react. React means to react, to perform the same action. We'll just repeat the same thing because we're looking at it the same way. Um, and so if I'm on a transformative practice where I'm trying to encourage change, repeating isn't helpful. So I need to have a perspective or a lens which allows me to see something new. And that's why we talk about detached. I'm not entangled. I'm not with all the baggage. I'm not engaged. Sometimes, the idea of imagine meeting someone for the first time, and what it's like, the clarity. Now, imagine someone who you've known for many, many years and going towards them as if you're meeting them for the first time. That's the kind of clarity that we want without all the baggage, without all of the expectations and judgments. So, a very clean, clear vision of what's going on. And it's a wonderful skill to develop, again, when one's trying to transform or emerge the best in the self.
So, how does one detach?
We need a perspective which is clear. And so we're going to have to move into really a different way of thinking about ourselves, position ourselves in a different way. The word mine is extremely loaded. It's even connected to the word attached. So when I attach to something, I say it's mine. And the moment I say it's mine, I lose all objectivity. I've always been rather sort of um, find it fascinating meeting parents, particularly mothers, working a lot in facilities where there are families and meeting mothers. And I noticed there was a range of approaches the mothers had. I mean, because it's really intense. This is my child. And how delicate it is to correct a parent on their child. And some mothers didn't even need, they were very good at it. They had a lot of objectivity. They were very caring and loving, of course, but they said, okay, we can't, they could see clearly, where others, it was like completely blind because it's my child. They're very good at criticizing another child, but the moments it's my child, all clarity goes out the window. So this word mine is really loaded. And so what we're trying to do is to get into a space where we shift the word mine. We need to redefine mine. And the other powerful word, of course, is I. So a spiritual practice helps me to move into a space where I have a different feeling of mine and I. And that's going to give me more clarity. So when we say in Raj Yoga, I am a soul and simply a trustee, I actually don't own anything here. It moves us into a space we call free or liberated. And that free or liberated state, or detached, if you will, is where I can see things a lot more clearly. The image that we often use is of an astronaut going into outer space. So when they're down on the ground and surrounded by, immersed in all those mine, they really can't have a clear sense of what's actually going on. But the minute they launch into space, they actually have to break free of gravity to make it into space. So there's a sense of liberating or freedom. And when they look back on the planet, and many will describe it as a spiritual experience, because they're not engrossed, caught up in all those attachments of day-to-day life, they're in this really free space. They have a completely different perspective and completely different sense of the world from that perspective. And many people instinctively, when they need to refresh or get a different take on their life, they go on a holiday. And that idea again of stepping outside of all those attachments, they have a different look or grip on their lives. So somehow being able to free the self. So detachment means freedom.
Sounds like it can get quite tricky. And for those who are aware that in the study of Raja Yoga, we also acknowledge that as souls, we take rebirth. So we have possibly births where we are trying to disconnect ourselves, perhaps maybe not in a very healthy way. And one of the things that comes up is this aspect of removing I, removing the self in the equation, or maybe have actually secluded ourselves from situations, because that seems to be a common response or common comment that I've heard from those taking the course of what detached means. Don't feel anything, don't think anything. So what are you what helps in terms of being able to maybe even break that habit, because it can sometimes be quite habitual unconsciously.
Yeah, you often hear souls feel that detached is pretty close to dead. So when that astronaut goes into outer space, it's not that they disappear, but they have a different sense of themselves. So we heard a beautiful example today, which is connected to detachment. And we often use in the course that if a babe, an infant, a small child is holding on to something, very attached, really holding on to something, but it's dangerous, you basically dangle something else in front of them and they'll release that and attach to something else. So this is a central part of Raj Yoga, that I'm not going into a dead, cold space. I'm going into a different space. I'm actually returning to original space. So when I say I'm going to release I and mine, I'm basically moving from one paradigm to another paradigm. So I am detaching, but not disappearing. I'm detaching, letting go of this paradigm and moving into this perspective or paradigm. So the most essential or basic is I'm no longer going to think of myself in a physical way as this body and everything connected to that. Instead, I'm going to think of myself as a spiritual being, an eternal being that takes rebirth, a soul. And how does that completely reframe me? And in that different reframing, now I'm going to look at myself. So it's this shift. I am detaching. I don't know if we want to say attaching to something else, but I suppose in the way we are reframing ourselves. And that's the stage of the detached observer. Is it's as if I'm standing in a different place, but not disappearing.
Mm-hmm. These sessions always seem to overlap with previous things that we've talked about, and some might think it feels like it's a broken record, or some might feel that it's actually really important.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to consider myself to be a spiritual being, what if I don't feel it?
Yeah.
And you really want to go into a different paradigm.
Yeah. Attachments are so deep. It actually, um, we, we begin to discover that in physical, the sign of strength is holding on. But actually, holding on is a sign of weakness in the spiritual. In the spiritual realm, letting go is a sign of power. So we're being asked to do something when we don't have any spiritual power because we've got so much attachment. We're being asked to do something that we actually don't have the power to do. So we have to give ourselves time to develop that strength. So that's one reason that it's a challenge for us, is just a lack of power. The other, of course, whenever we talk about attachment, there will be fear at the thought of letting go, even if the thing we're letting go of is harmful. And even though there's something very beautiful awaiting us, if we do let go, there's still that fear of loss. We've connected loss so much to detaching or letting go. And so these are two big, major obstacles that are sitting really sometimes at quite a subconscious level. And we have to just give ourselves time. The beauty of all of this is that, if you ask yourself, which do I think is true? Do I think I am this body? Or do I think I am a soul? And once we've really sorted that out, it's just a matter of time, really, before we'll start to feel it. But if I'm not really clear on that basic thing, then of course it will be a challenge. I'll constantly be battling myself. The irony is that I am a soul. So it's rather interesting that I don't feel it. And that really tells us how far we moved from ourselves. And this happens actually in physical paradigms as well. With the body, the physical body, the way that we move the body as infants is very healthy, i.e., we're constantly active, basically. But as adults, we start to engage in activity, actually inactivity, so that certain muscles actually go into almost amnesia states. They don't fire anymore. They're there, but they're just not firing. And so it's like I can send mental cues and it's just not firing. So we have to actually engage in specific drills to get those muscles to fire. And it's kind of a bit the same with spirituality, and it can take time, but I want to, and this is the one thing we're quite weak in. I want to engage in drills to get that spirituality to fire. And we don't. We just stay in a very intellectual place. We don't actually do the drills. We just kind of think about it and we're clever with it, but we don't actually do the activity. I might be sitting still in meditation, but there is activity going on internally and spiritually. I'm trying to do something. There's spiritual movement, and that is something that we're very Brahma Baba, the first student, was brilliant at it. But that is a major obstacle. We just stay in a passive or intellectual. We don't actually exercise. So we get very clever And I think we saw with the original students, they were very basic, very, very basic. They also didn't have a lot of information, which was a blessing, but very, very basic in their approach to feeling soul consciousness. So I think if we can have a basic but very practical approach to soul consciousness, considering these aspects that I maybe lack power and that also there might be fear, I think if we take that all into account, then patiently we will get there.
Just warm invitation for those if they have not seen the interview of the Raj Yogi, the series of power recognition, the 3-part series that may actually be really relevant and useful, especially when Judy was sharing about I might not be feeling it, but do I even resonate with that? Or what do I resonate in terms of my identity? So these 2 different sessions, the ones on Tuesdays and the ones on Thursdays, actually do really help each other on a practical level. That's what they're meant to. So, detachment. Explain to me, like I'm in grade 1, how does detachment, your experience, how you're feeling it through these years studying, has helped you to practically feel that actually you can be one who can be benevolent to others? Because when you're talking about when you're a mother who's attached, then what the first thing I was thinking about was then actually all you really care about is your child. You don't seem to have the same kind of regard for others, and that's just the example of a mother. How we can probably do that with a lot of other scenes and situations too.
Yeah, I had a very interesting experience when I was in dance. And you may have heard of the concept of a stage mother, stage parent. And I just happened to be engaged in dance school in a city where I was away from home. So the mother was not there. So when there was competitions, I would be often backstage on my own without, and I would, the other mothers would be there with their children. And yes, they really only cared about their child. I would actually be attacked, psychologically attacked by other mothers to see if they could undermine my confidence so that their child could win. It was fascinating. We really do look out.
Wow.
I think, again, this idea of shifting paradigms, it's very important when we say detached observer. I'm not, we can need to repeat, I'm not moving into a dead place. I'm moving into soul consciousness, right? So body consciousness means I'm attached to the body, and I also get attached to certain dynamics. We call them vices, which are really suppressing my true character. So these would be ego, fear, insecurity, doubt, jealousy, etc. This is all that I've become attached to, and I'm trying to look. You can see how these different forces would really be like a fun house, a mirror with it really distorts how I look at things. Imagine looking through the lens of jealousy, or looking through the lens of desire, or looking through the lens of insecurity. It just completely distorts. So detach means I'm actually moving into a way of thinking about myself that doesn't have those distorting principles operating. In fact, it has very, what we call, pure forces operating. So when we talk about I am a soul, and that is the detached observer. It's actually one of the qualities of the soul. I'm a soul. I'm actually, my true character as a soul is very peaceful, very content, very light. So I'm stepping into that paradigm, that experience, that awareness, that alignment. And so it's a really funny thing with detachment is that, yes, I am becoming free of the things that repress our loving and kind nature, and stepping into a space where our loving and kind nature is very natural. It's, again, this not dead space. And I think that's the problem, is that we say, how can I be benevolent if I'm in a dead space?
Yeah,
right?
you can't feel
I
anything.
don't feel anything, right? Um, so I'm stepping out of a space which is very repressive, like a jail, and I'm stepping into freedom where my true qualities are liberated or unlocked.
Mhm. So, what is the role of the Supreme Soul, or some may call God? What is his role in supporting me to become a detached observer?
You
Or
know,
does he play
it's,
a role?
yeah, it's so wonderful to connect to a being who never, ever becomes body conscious. So, can understand, but never themselves experiences ego or greed, or stays in those wonderful qualities of the soul all the time. So we say ever pure. It's really amazing. I mean, just think about your life, what you're like when you're around people who are very kind and loving and peaceful, and what that does to you, what that brings out in you. For some, it brings that out. For others, it irritates them, but it irritates them not because the person is irritating, but because they remind us that we have disconnected to that in ourselves. But it does something to you. And definitely that's the experience. What is this yoga that it burns away um, our false self, if you will. And it's really just the force of being with someone who is in that ever pure state. It really has this, it colors us quite deeply, actually. It really unlocks our own highest potential. So that's really a key part of this thing we call yoga, is spending time. It's keeping us very safe from those other forces exerting pressure on us.
So, why would I need to be a detached observer as I continue in this journey?
I was thinking about this so much, and it's really so central. It's so challenging for us. So, what Raj Yoga is saying, and you may or may not believe it. And I personally think it gets to a point where it doesn't matter whether or not you believe it, because it's impossible for you to be happy without this principle. Absolutely impossible. And what the principle, the very foundation of Raj, or what Raj means is sovereign. What it's saying is, if you are feeling any kind of unhappiness, sorrow, obstacle, challenge, it is never, ever, ever due to something outside. It's never due to a situation or a person outside. The the reason I'm experiencing that is because of something inside of me. That is the underlining premise of Raj Yoga.
I can see
Um,
many go,
I know
but,
many are like, I
but.
can't. I can always come up with Rega, and again, I will remind you of my first exposure. What I recognize as my first exposure to spirituality was reading a book by Viktor Frankl, and he was, of course, incarcerated in a concentration camp, and whilst in the concentration camp, so I think that's a pretty extreme situation where you don't even have control over whether you're going to live or die. At that moment, he came, he really developed his theory that, in terms of quest for meaning, that I am responsible, even in the most extreme situations. I am responsible for the quality of my life. And when I read that, I was like, that's it. That is everything. That's the bottom line. That is living, not surviving, living. I mean, otherwise, can you imagine that other people or situations control how I feel? And so I'm going to go through my life trying to get everybody and everything to go the way I want, because that's the only way I'll be happy. So not only am I a victim of circumstances, I am now also a control freak. And that's how most people go through their lives, as victims and control freaks. And it's an impossible, you can see the state of the world, how it's emerged with that kind of formula. And so Raj Yoga says, no, you are a master of the self, and to become a master of the world, that it's it's within the self that that's where the power lies, is within the self. Learn to master yourself rather than trying to master other people or situations. If you master the self and start to combine that with the power of the law of karma, you will create a very beautiful life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, given that that's the premise, I need to be able to see and diagnose what kind of crazy stuff is going on inside of me that's coming into these strange activities that are creating strange things in my life. The law of karma says that whatever you're experiencing in your life is your own creation, right? Cause and effect. Again, we find that very challenging to accept. And I hear most people say, oh my gosh, what horrible things have I done? It's like, that's not really what it's trying to do. It's trying to say you have creative control over your life in terms of your actions. So I need to know what's going on inside of me that is distorting, creating the kind of life I'm living here. If I'm ever experiencing any sorrow, I need to remove the blind spots. And it's just so, I have nothing but respect for the original students of this organization, because they really, really mastered this art of looking at the self clearly, and really zero tolerance for blaming anyone else. And it's not that they were even blaming themselves, they consistently believed they had incredible potential. And so they were looking at the self clearly in order to emerge that highest potential, not to feel bad. So, really being able to see the self. And I guess this is something that um, was very deeply trained in us in dance class, that the vision was always that we have capacities, but we were taught to look in the mirror and self correct. And you have to see yourself very clearly to do that.
Is that the same as objectivity?
In some sense, yeah, but I would add love.
Mm.
Because again, when we say objectivity, it sounds very scientific. This is actually looking clearly out of love for the self, right? So it's a real respect, regard, worthiness of the self. I'm worth it. I want to bring out the best to myself. So there's no sense, if there's ego, which is low self-respect, it's very hard to be a detached observer of the self.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can have that self-respect, then I begin to see I'm quite interested in seeing myself clearly. I want to bring out the best in myself.
So perhaps, the last question is, would that capacity to be a detached observer help me to break cycles?
Yeah, that to me is really the point, is that I am engaging in a way of thinking or seeing or attitudes that I'm blind to, but I'm finding that I keep landing up in the same dynamics or feelings or reactions. And we very often, because again, we have an old formula, we try to move away from what we feel is the problem outside. So we change jobs or change relationships or whatever the case. But we'll start to notice that when I move into the new job or the new, it starts to happen again, because it's just looping. I'm performing the same actions. I haven't noticed what the problem is inside. And so, yeah, it's huge in breaking cycles. And I think that detached observer goes hand in hand with feeling more and more light, because I'm breaking the cycles of what we call body consciousness, operating in a body conscious way. I'm operating more and more in a soul conscious way, and that just creates such lightness.
Sounds like when you're heavy, you can't actually see
No,
anything any different.
no, blame is so common when we're heavy. Again, there's no power in that state, and there's a lot of blind spots when we're heavy. It's extremely important to keep yourself safe in a spiritual practice. And a huge way to do that is to have a schedule, a lifestyle that really protects you, disciplines that protect you. because, as we've mentioned in other sessions, um, these forces of ego and attachment want to keep you in the dark, want to keep you stuck. And so I really need to accumulate power. And a daily schedule is really useful in protecting the self and helping me to accumulate power.
So I believe we might, it's in these sessions on Thursdays that we will touch upon the different aspects of lifestyle.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for those
Yeah,
sessions.
and please let us know if you have questions or requests.
For sure. So we are running out of time.
That just started.
I know, it's always flying by. So I suppose we should really go into a little reflection. That's the most important as well. It's not just listening and hearing yes about the practical experiences, but we do invite you to the experience sessions. And so those take place on Tuesdays and Thursdays. For the ones in English, it's at 6:45 to 7:30, and there is a Hindi speaking evening experience as well that happens at 6 o'clock on Thursdays. So thank you for joining.
Thank you. We use the word detached, but it has a deep, deep relationship with the word love. That there comes a time in my life when I am pulled for the sake of the self, out of love for the self, to really add quality to my life, to let go of laboring, to let go of reactivity, this inner pull towards my highest potential. And that's the beginning of disinterest or letting go of the old, that love for something new. And that love pulls me inwards to quiet moments of reflection, solitude, beginning to refine my inner eye, the eye that can see more clearly, more honestly, my own thoughts and attitudes. It is an eye that is clear but also very loving. Its intent is never to judge. It is never impatient. It is filled with so much understanding and respect. And it starts to see more clearly both what I am capable of and what is holding me back. This eye of detached observation becomes my greatest ally. Loving, supportive, but it never lies to me. Very clear. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. We may need to have another session because the thought came during the reflection was at this time, everyone feels influenced, especially, it's quite interesting. This coronavirus at first, can you tell if it's influenza, but just being influenced. And how does the stage, the experience of detached observer, how is it relevant to not being influenced? that's a cliffhanger. It may have to be another session. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to hand it over to Judy in terms of upcoming sessions,
Mm.
and I will be on the back with the IT. Thank you. Om
Mm.
Shanti.
So, as Nora mentioned, we are continuing with drop in meditation on Tuesdays and Thursday evenings just before these interview sessions. And the reason we structure it that way is it's really helpful to have a meditation before one explores spiritual ideas. So those are 6:45 to 7:30 Tuesdays and Thursdays, followed by these interview format sessions. So Tuesday is just more general topics of spirituality, and Thursday we look at Raj Yoga, particularly aspects of the study. And then on Saturdays we have inner fitness, 2 to 3 p.m. It looks at the metaphor, if you will, takes a common practice in physical fitness and how that looks spiritually. So I believe this Saturday is integration. So you're welcome to join. You're always welcome to contact us by email if there's any questions. And we so appreciate you joining us for these sessions. Om Shanti.